Hey guys, my name is Alex, and you're watching the resurrection of my video project series thing, Kingly Endeavors, in which I intend to read all of Stephen King's novels in chronological order, and to hopefully post a video a week about them, which is not the way it's been going. The book I'm talking about today is The Wizard and the Glass, which is not the one I'm supposed to be talking about. As I mentioned in the reintroduction to the series, part of the reason I bailed, I jumped ship from Kingly Endeavors like 2.5 years ago, is because in following the chronology, I came upon Rose Madder. Some of you may not be familiar with this book that he wrote in the early 90s, and I was pretty struck by it too. I was excited, not because of anything to do with the jacket copy, but just because it was, I'd heard nothing about it. And the reason I'd never heard anything about it is because, and probably the reason you haven't heard anything about it, is because it's fucking terrible. One of the worst books King has ever written, up there with The Dark Half. So I was having a really hard time trying to power through Rose Madder. And I got so verklempt with it that I was like, you know what? Let me like go back and forth between this and the next book, which is Desperation. I'd read it in high school, and I had seen the miniseries as well, so I knew how it sort of turned out at the end. But even Desperation was so fucking long. And so my interest kind of petered out. After Desperation comes The Green Mile. After The Green Mile comes the book that I'm talking about today, The Wizard and the Glass. So I should jump right to The Green Mile, because I love The Green Mile. The only problem is I cannot find my copy. So I was putting myself in this weird tizzy where about the sequence. Do I put Rose Madder first, or no, skip ahead to Desperation, or do Green Mile first, or Desperation and The Green Mile and then Rose Madder? I got so stressed out about it that I was like, you know what I'm going to put first? My mental health. I don't want to read Rose Madder right now, so I'm not going to read Rose Madder right now. The prospect of reading Desperation is a little exhausting, so I'm not going to read it. I can't find The Green Mile, and I don't want to have to buy a new copy, so I'm going to hold off. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to read those books, but for now, I'm going to skip those three just to keep these wheels turning. Part of the reason that I was so genuinely conflicted about fucking breaking the chronology is because, yes, it is largely just sort of a completionist's impulse that's compelling me to want to read all of these novels. But insofar as there's anything I'm trying to, like, discern in the whole arc of King's career, it's that I want to see how he develops stylistically and how his relationship changes to his, what I think are his two major themes. The two themes that manifest in every book he has ever written. Those themes are confinement and addiction. Now, we've talked about the confinement thing, but like, just to gloss over it again. The Shining has a family trapped in a hotel. Misery has a writer trapped in a room. Cujo has a mom and son trapped in a car. Desperation has innocent people trapped in jail cells and the backseat of a squad car. Gerald's Game has a woman handcuffed to a bed. The Green Mile takes place in a prison, as does The Shawshank Redemption. Dreamcatcher is a man who gets sucked by aliens into his own brain, which manifests as a giant warehouse full of boxes. His first novel, Carrie, has a very long set piece in which a bunch of teenagers are trapped in a gymnasium. And those manifestations of confinement, recurring so often as they do, I think that they reflect the part of Stephen King who wants desperately to tell stories. He's not a religious guy, but you can tell that the tradition of storytelling, the communication that happens with storytelling, is his religion. I think these recurring kind of parables of people escaping confinement reflect how Stephen King wants desperately to tell stories, but he's also very wary of the foremost occupational hazard of being a professional writer, which is loneliness. You can feel not only that you are trapped in your room, writing all day, you can also end up feeling, as we see in Dreamcatcher, like you're trapped in your head. The second occupational hazard of being a writer is drug addiction. And the drug addiction probably sprouts from trying to deal with the first occupational hazard. So part of my goal in wanting to read these books in a strict chronological order is to see how Stephen King's relationship with those two themes evolves as he gets older. Now, The Wizard of the Glass is, I think, his, like, 25th novel, but it's the 4th volume of his Dark Tower series. And it came out in the year 1997, which is my favorite year. I am obsessed with 1997 because that is the year that I learned how calendars work. And no, that is not a joke. Speaking of 1997, one of the turning points in Stephen King's career is that he got hit by a car in like 1998 or 1999. And in this 1997 novel, there's a fucking really eerie thing where he's describing the proliferation of muties. Muties are creatures that have been mutated, presumably by radiation, like a bomb was dropped. But in particular, very early in the book, we see this deer frolicking around, and the deer has a useless, like, floppy fifth leg. hanging off of its rear. And Stephen King mentions in his memoir that when he got hit by the car, the part of his body that was most irreparably fucked up was his leg. The doctor told him, like, I think we should amputate that leg. King tried to argue that they should not, and the doctor described it by saying, the bones in your leg are like a sock full of marbles. That description has stayed with me ever since I first read it like 15 years ago. King really wanted to keep his fucking leg though, so he went through all these like agonizing surgeries, which I don't think I really have the fortitude to do. I'd be like, take the leg. Which reminds me, speaking of surgeries and like sort of emotional fortitude, and this is a digression, feel free to skip ahead. I used to spend a lot of time at a divey little kind of club-like place called Red Bar near my apartment. And at Red Bar, there was a regular there named Gino. And I got really friendly with Gino, and one time he came into the bar. Queen's Gambit had just appeared on Netflix. And he was looking kind of refreshed, and I was like, hey, what's new? He says, the other day I stood up and I was getting ready to go to work, and like I lost my breath and my heart started pounding, and so I went to the ER. I went to the ER and they did all these tests. They said, oh, you had a really bad panic attack, so you should take a couple days off. So he took 2 days off of work and he marathoned Queen's Gambit. And he was like, man, I felt the anxiety melting away. Gino's like mid-40s. He's got 2 kids. But he's got such a sunny disposition that, yeah, he seems like the kind of guy who sort of bottles up all of his stress, and he's just always smiley, happy-go-lucky. So then, like, a couple weeks later, it's Thanksgiving. I send Gino a text. I'm like, hey, happy Thanksgiving. What are you up to? And he writes back like, oh, I had another one of those episodes, and I'm in the hospital again. And I was like, Gino, you must be like really fucking stressed out. You might want to look into like a new line of work. And he goes, oh no, it turns out that wasn't a panic attack. I have congestive heart failure. And they put him on a list to get a heart transplant. And the odds did not look good, but he got the heart. So he gets the surgery, and a couple days later I call him. Hey Gino, how's it going? Did you get your heart?
Yeah, it's going good. I got the heart.
He had this crazy, raspy, deep, horrible voice. Did they give you the heart of a demon? Why do you sound that way? Yeah, apparently after getting a heart transplant, you sound that way for a few weeks. But we talked a few times over the next couple weeks, and I was like, do you know anything about the donor? He just knew it was a very young person who had died in an accident. And I was like, would you want to know anything about the person whose death kind of facilitated your survival? He said that you can find out as much as you like. In fact, you can get in touch with the family. But he sort of sat on it. And then he moved to another part of Florida to be with relatives, and we haven't really stayed in touch. But we're talking about a fantasy novel. The Wizard in the Glass is a story within a story. The first 100 pages of the novel show Roland and his quartet, his group of friends. They're traveling in a train, and then they stop on a sort of desolate highway, and they make a campfire, and he tells this very long story that transpires over the next 700 pages. But in that respect, I think this book is kind of about storytelling. There's a scene toward the middle where a young Roland, because he's telling a story about his boyhood, he's talking with one of his friends, and the friend is telling him about the significance of a dream, and Roland is like, pah, dreams. And he says that they're stupid and they're not worth considering, that it's just it's like the trash from your imagination, that they don't mean anything. Now, obviously, Stephen King doesn't agree with that because he gives us like 6 dream sequences in this book, but there has always been, I think everyone who's a fan of Stephen King will agree, there is something about the Dark Tower series that is just very different from the rest of his novels. When Roland says that the symbolism in a dream doesn't mean anything, don't think about it too much, obviously Stephen King doesn't agree with that in his daily life and as an artist. But the Dark Tower series is so imaginative, it is so phantasmagoric, there are such striking images coming up all the time, that you get a sense that this is the one long story where Stephen King has kind of interrupted the analytical impulse of what comes to mind. You get a sense of authorial faith in this book. That images are coming to mind for Stephen King. He's throwing them on the page like the deer with the floppy leg or a sentient train, and he's not asking himself, okay, does this have some kind of metaphorical import or significance to the story? I feel with the Dark Tower that he's trusting his subconscious. Images are coming to mind, he's throwing them down on the page, he's trying to make sure they come off clean and well integrated with everything around them. He's just trusting that all of this shit is coming from the same imaginative well. And that is, I think, what the heart is of this series. There's a lot of shit you can say bad about this series. Consider this line from the book. The woman's eye flashed uglily. Now, maybe he is deliberately using the ugliest word in the language, but most likely not. But it's also, you feel Stephen King showing up to this huge world he has built, and he's just optimistically trundling along. And this goes back to some shit that I've been saying to myself for a while when it comes to content creation, when it comes to making YouTube videos or a podcast or blog posts or writing novels. If the thing that you are doing creatively, if you want to do it on a regular basis, there is not a chance in hell that you are going to sustain regular output if you do not find a way of doing that thing in a way that just hardens your nipples immediately. The act of doing the thing has to be great. Has to be, like, just euphoric. And Stephen King feels like a fucking pig in shit in every volume of The Dark Tower, at least the first 4. Like with The Dark Half or Rose Madder, the prose in those god-awful books, it's as though Stephen King swallowed a roll of dental floss, and it's as it's digesting, he's having to rope it out in the form of sentences. It's a very hard vibe to communicate, but you read those books and you're like, this author is not interested in this story. Definitely not the case with the Dark Tower series. Also, there's some sexual stuff that's a little... Actually, I think it's fine. But it's sexual stuff having to do with a 16-year-old girl and her 14-year-old boyfriend. And I do think it's handled tastefully. As responsible adults, we don't want to sexualize minors. But as honest adults, we have to acknowledge that minors they're kind of in a journey of sexual self-realization. So I don't think the topic of, a sex life among minors should be completely off limits in literature. You just have to be tasteful about it, and I think if you are going to depict it, you just don't want to make it erotic. And I think that's kind of how King does it here. He doesn't use terribly corny metaphors about his sword entering her sheath. It's very, like, flowery and romantic, and it's, I think, pretty tasteful. But when young people are fucking in a Stephen King book, you kind of can't help but remember the gangbang in It. Sorry if this is a spoiler. Surprise, surprise, they left it out of the movies. But at the center of It, bear in mind, as Mike Stoklasa said, the co-author of It is cocaine. At the center of that book, the group of 12-year-old protagonists, they all decide that they have to gangbang the one girl in their group in order to defeat an evil clown from outer space who's actually a spider, an enemy of a cosmic turtle. Drugs. And this sounds very morbid to ever mention, but when Stephen King dies and we get the womb to tomb official, all cards on the table biography, one of the things I'm going to be most interested to hear about is whether or not there was, like, open contention about that, child gangbang scene from It among, like, the editors or people maybe just away from Stephen King in the publishing house. People were like, I don't think we should publish this. Another recurring visual in Stephen King's work, which is on prime display here, is bodily deterioration. In The Shining, The Tommyknockers, Desperation, The Stand, Thinner, of course. Stephen King likes this storytelling element where a villain's mind, the fleeing of their mind, is mirrored in the way that, like, their skin is falling off, sores are opening, their teeth are cracking and falling out. A lot of this book is very predictable, but there's some surprises, especially toward the end of the book, the proper end of the book. Stephen King loves to start a chapter and end a chapter by telling you the end is near. This is a good book. Not the best of the series. I think that still goes to The Wastelands, Volume 3. I am actually pretty bummed to see that I've got, 4 or 5 novels between Volumes 4 and 5, but then I know he wrote 5, 6, and 7 in, like, a sprint. And then he went on the Today Show and he's like, I fucking retire. I'm done. I hate this shit. And 17 years later, he has written another 25 novels. Anyways, that's it for me. This is going on a very long time. If you're a fan of the Dark Tower series, let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you notice the confinement thing and the bodily deterioration stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.